Welcome to the model of violence, aggression, violation of rules, and the question about discipline. Violence and aggression are a global challenge. Early years, schools, and how we treat our students can have a huge impact on their lives and thus can greatly influence these problems. Many people, many organizations, and many institutions have devoted their time and efforts in dealing with these topics. Now, in this model, we will present to you three approaches that achieve significant transformation in the levels of violence and aggression in schools. Those are approaches that teach us how to attend to conflict. Those are nonviolent communication, mediation, restorative justice. But first, let us say why we think this is an important topic to look at if you're a person working in the field of education. It is important because we all meet such situations where aggression and violence arise, and we all wonder and want to know and to understand why this is happening and what can we do about it. It is also important because anger is completely natural human feeling that we all feel, and aggression is one possible reaction connected to it, especially if you are young and you don't know how to self-regulate yourself, or you don't know other reactions and strategies to deal with anger. It is also important because it refers to our core, deep beliefs about human nature. Are we violent by nature or not? We will have a closer look at this question in a few minutes. And we will see that it depends on a very important factor that we need to take into consideration if we want to build a peaceful atmosphere in our schools and in our classrooms. It is also an important topic because in every place where there is a group of people, conflicts happen. This is inevitable because we are not all the same and we are different. How we deal with conflicts is the actual measurement of our growth as a society. Do we focus on the action? Do we inflict punishment and deal with the conflict this way? Or we search for the reason of why this is happening and work on that level and support everyone for more understanding and more connection. What we usually tend to do, the usual practices. What we usually tend to do is to judge, blame, criticize, and label the person. We also tend to attend to emotional violence in order to deal with the conflict. Embarrassment, shame, threatening, and withdrawing of attention and support are considered forms of emotional violence. We also tend to lecture and explain without listening, and we also tend to punish. All of those are fear-driven. Those approaches are not only for children. It is how we mainly deal with those situations of conflicts, aggression, and violence in the society. But what we know about those methods, after many, many years of experience, apart from the fact that they provoked fear, they also don't get to the real cause of the problem. They don't address the reason of why this is all happening in the first place, so the problem remains unresolved. And they also accumulate more resistance, more anger, resentment, conflicts, and violence. So the question here is how to change the situation. And in order to answer this, we need to consider two other questions. What do we think about human nature, and what do we think about conflicts? In every social order and in every society, there is a hidden concept of what the human being is. There are assumptions and beliefs about the human nature. Is it initially selfish and aggressive, or it is initially good-hearted and compassionate? And this is not an easy question to answer because in our lives, we see many different examples of both. We see kind people and we see violent people. So what is actually the answer? Gabor Mate gives us a good answer. Human nature is a spectrum of possible results. His opinion is supported by Robert Sapolsky, who says the nature of our nature is not to be restricted in our nature, which actually means that we can be many things. Our incredible gift is to adapt. Our nature is influenced by a lot of things. Different conditions provoke different variations and results in us. So if we fixate on a particular manifestation of the human behavior in a particular place or time, we mistakenly equate what we do with who we are. And instead of looking at the conditions in which this manifests itself, we accept that this is our nature, copy the conditions that do not support our well-being, and this becomes a vicious circle. What we can do instead, in seeking clarity about the human nature, we need to free ourselves from all fixed ideas about our nature and ask ourselves, what circumstances and factors produce such results? What circumstances and factors produce kindness and compassion? And what circumstances and factors produce violence and aggression? Some fundamental needs and capabilities are encoded in our biological device. How our nature unfolds depends mainly on how well these needs are met and how much we encourage or suppress opportunities. This is true for the whole life, but is most important in the developmental process. Which possibilities will manifest, which behaviors will manifest in us, and what we will be depends mostly on the environment, the conditions in which our development takes place, and the extent to which they meet our fundamental needs. We need to clarify that the genetic conditioning of human behavior is a myth. There is no such thing. No one is born bad. We are not genetically programmed to behave or act in a certain way. Even if there is a predisposition to genes, science proves that the expression of genes depends on the environment. So the environment is the leading factor if we are going to be violent or not. Therefore, the decisive factor in how biology will manifest itself in life and what will be and what we will do, how we will behave, is the environment, the conditions in which we grow, our subjective experience. In conditions of care, meeting needs, support, human nature flourishes and manifests itself as caring, supportive, and compassionate of the other human being, and vice versa. What do we think about conflicts then? Do we see them as bad, something to be suppressed, ignored, or avoided at any cost, or we see them as part of life and as an opportunity? If we see them as something bad, then we want to avoid them or fight with them or defend ourselves. If we see them as an opportunity and part of life, we want to learn from them. So what are the principles of successful in long-term practices? Those are the principles of long-term successful practices in dealing with conflicts: understanding, connection, support, empathy, feedback, and restoration. Let's have a closer look at each one of them. Understanding. Peace cannot be achieved through violence. It can only be attained through understanding. Understanding the why. Everything that we do has a why. Understanding the reason, the motive behind actions gives us a real chance for a change. Connection. Connection before correction. Prioritizing the relationship before the correction gives us the chance to really reach deeper transformational change, awareness, and growth instead of changing based on fear of punishment. Support. Everyone needs support, especially the ones who are making troubles and misbehaving. Most of the time, we adults withdraw our support and presence from children as a form of punishment if they are doing something that we recognize as bad. This only deepens the problem. Children need support in the form of someone who continues to trust in them even when they are in a difficult and challenging behaviors and helps them take responsibility for the action taken. The difficult child is the child who is unhappy. He is at war with himself, and in consequence, he is at war with the whole world. The difficult adult is in the same boat. Empathy. Empathy is another key factor and principle of practices that are long-term successful. We often think that to give empathy to the one who is violent, aggressive, and misbehaving is not the good action. We need to give empathy only to the victim. But if we remember that the difficult child is the child who is unhappy, we will immediately understand that it needs a lot of empathy and a lot of support. Anyone who is unhappy and in a difficult situation needs empathy. This is also how we model their response when they see someone who is unhappy. And feedback. Our actions always have consequences to the others and the surrounding. So letting the person know what are the consequences for others, what are the effects from the action for the others, without criticism, blame, and judgment is the feedback they need. Feedback, this is just an information about actions and impacts. It can be difficult to give feedback because we tend to mix our observations, the pure information and facts, with our interpretations about what has happened. And restoration is the action of returning something to the former owner, place, or condition. Restorative justice seeks to examine the harmful impact of an action and then determines what can be done to repair that harm, with the responsible person taking responsibility and acting to repair the harm done. Restorative practices are rooted in restorative justice. They emphasize repairing the harm done to people and relationships rather than punishing people. So what are the successful practices and methods? What we mean by successful practices and methods is how to address violence, aggression, conflicts, and violation in a way that really transforms and supports change. Those are the approaches that we suggest: nonviolent communication, mediation, and restorative practices. Let's have a closer look at each one of them. Nonviolent communication. Nonviolent communication helps us with understanding the why, being heard, better self-connection, and also connection to others, and support. Nonviolent communication is a way of thinking and communication that deepens connection between people and brings self-awareness, compassion, and understanding. Nonviolent communication is rooted in several assumptions. The first and the most important one is that behind every action there is a need, and all actions are attempts to meet needs. Our desire to meet needs, whether conscious or unconscious, underlies every action we take. And we only resort to violence or other actions that do not meet our own or others' needs when we don't recognize more effective strategies to meet needs. Another key assumption of nonviolent communication is that our feelings point to needs being met or unmet. Feelings may be triggered but not caused by others. Our feelings arise directly out of our inner experience of whether our needs seem to be met or unmet under the given circumstances. Our assessment of whether or not our needs are met usually involves an interpretation or belief. When our needs are met, we usually feel happy, satisfied, rested, peaceful. When our needs are not met, we usually feel sad, scared, angry, disappointed, hurt, confused, frustrated, exhausted, or many others. Another assumption of nonviolent communication is that all human beings have the capacity for compassion. We have an innate capacity for compassion, though not always the knowledge of how to access it. When we are met with compassion and respect for our autonomy, we tend to have more access to our own compassion for ourselves and for others. What we need to do to support and understand and find the reason behind the actions with nonviolent communication. First, we need to meet the other with compassion and no judgment, no criticism, and no blame. We need to meet with intention to connect and to understand what need he or she was trying to meet. Then we need to ask and to listen beyond the labels. What happened? To name the observation and be very careful not to mix it with interpretations. To name the feelings. To find the need behind the actions and to empathize with the need. It is very important that we distinguish between the real facts, the observations, and our interpretations. The observation is what we see or hear, and the interpretation is the story and the meaning we put behind what we see or what we hear. It is also important to distinguish between thoughts and feelings. Sometimes we express our thoughts as feelings. Our feelings are our emotions, and our thoughts are our intellectual ideas. It is also important to distinguish between needs and desires. Needs are universal, and all people have them. Those are air, safety, food, connection, love, and many, many others like respect. Desires are concrete things some people want. Can be ice cream, concrete clothes or shoes, a car. It is best when this support with nonviolent communication, the understanding and the empathy is given to the child by someone the child trusts and has already an established connection and safe positive relationship, someone like a mentor. Using nonviolent communication, we can achieve relief, less tension, and feeling heard. And when someone is feeling hurt, there is more space for understanding the impact of the action, the effects of the action, and there is more space for hearing and more willingness to take responsibility. Second, long-term successful practice, mediation. Mediation can be presented in school by different structural options. It can be a group of people who are helping others to achieve understanding and agreement in a conflict, like mediation committee. It can be just one person helping the others, or a mentor who is playing the role of a mediator. Mediation is not court, is not arbitration, it's not consultation, it's not therapy. Mediation is a process to resolve conflicts between two or more people who are unable to solve their disagreement independently. The process relies on an impartial third party, the mediator, to help the individuals use communication to resolve the differences and reach a mutually beneficial agreement. Mediation is always voluntary, meaning that both sides must agree to mediation. The four characteristics of mediation: voluntary, equality, neutrality, objectivity, and confidentiality. The mediator serves as a bridge. The mediator works with both parties and therefore does not give advice to either party involved in the dispute. The mediator is not an advocate and doesn't take sides or promote one person's point of view. What the mediator does is that the mediator facilitates the space, facilitates the dialogue without blame and criticism using the nonviolent communication approach, ensures the equality, supports the parties into hearing and understanding each other, and supports the process of finding solutions, not by giving one solution, but with open questions for the parties to explore. The process of mediations consists of several steps: meeting with both of the parties, listening to their sharings and stories, assisting them into turning the story into facts, observations, feelings, and needs, then meeting all together with the aim for everybody to express themselves and hear the other. The goal is restoring connection, being heard, hearing the other and the impact on him, and underlying and identifying both sides' needs. And then, after this step, we can start exploring possibilities for win-win solutions and reach agreement, or just the feeling that that's enough. The benefits of mediation are that everybody gets heard, there is less tension, brings clarity, understanding, and maybe more connection, goes to the heart of the matter, conflicting parties are much more satisfied, and there is more togetherness and more peace. And every school can adopt this practice, either by having a training for one or more of the teachers, or also in inviting the students, taking the training and helping by creating a mediation committee. Restorative practices. Restorative practices provide students and caring adults with an intentional, inclusive, and respectful way of thinking about and talking about and responding to behavioral issues, conflicts, and violations. When integrated in a school community, restorative practices help to build and repair relationships, prioritize student agency, and they emphasize punitive discipline in favor of communication to resolve conflicts. Restorative practices in schools are strategies that use the underlying principles of restorative justice instead of traditional punishment measurements. Restorative justice is a new way to look at justice, an alternative to using punishment-based approaches. And in schools, it is also a new way to look at school discipline and behavioral management in classrooms. Restorative justice focuses on repairing the harm through inclusive process that brings together everybody who is involved. What is the problem that restorative justice actually addresses? This problem is framed in a question: how do we as a society treat crimes and violations? When there is a crime or violation of a rule, what should be done? What does justice require? The legal system that now exists has shaped our thinking on this matter, that we must punish the offender. However, we need to think about the question, does this meet the needs of the victims? Also, does this enable the offenders to take responsibility they need to take for their actions? Instead of the field of judging right and wrong, we can shift the focus to asking new questions and sharing what is the harm done, how did we feel, and what effect the action had on us, and what can be done to restore the harm. So restorative justice is a new framework about violations, and it is based on three main principles: focusing on the harm, the damage, and the resulting needs of the victims, but also those of the community and the offenders. Goal is to repair the damage and to heal the situation as far as possible. Work on the responsibilities and obligations that arise due to these damages. Engagement: all parties, victims, offenders, and the broader community are involved in the dialogue and in the healing process. Restorative justice is an approach to achieving justice involving as far as possible all stakeholders of the crime and enabling them to jointly identify and discuss the harms, the needs, and duties responsibilities arising from the offense. The goal is to cure and fix things to the highest degree possible. So the restorative justice is based on a reasonable understanding of the violation of the rule. The crime, violation, abuse is actually an injury to people or a violation of interpersonal relationships. The violations create obligations, and the main obligation is to repair the harm caused. The goals of restorative justice. Key decisions to be made by those most affected by the offense. To restore and fix the damage as much as possible, and to reduce the likelihood of new violations to happen. Fixing the damage requires us to pay attention to the harm people. It requires us also to pay attention to the people who have done the harm and the damage, and requires us to pay attention to the reasons of why this happened at the first place. So in this sense, the goals are to talk about the harm done and the possible reparation, also to target the causes. Fixing things requires us not only attention to the damage, but also to the causes of the damage and the violation. Offenders have the obligation to understand the reasons for their behavior, but they usually can't do this on their own and they need help and support for this. Moreover, there may be a wider responsibilities than the direct responsibility of the offender, for example, social injustice or other conditions that cause deviation in behavior and create unhealthy conditions, which may in part be the responsibility of the family, community, or society as a whole. If we really want to delve deeper into the study of harms and causes, we need also to analyze what the offenders themselves experience. Those who have broken the rules and the law have been traumatized or have been victims of severe trials. We need to remember that the difficult child or the difficult person is someone who is suffering and who is unhappy. The traumas that those people have been experiencing can become an important contributing factor to the disorder and the violation of the rules and their actions that are harmful for the others. Many of the manifestations of violence are a repetition of an experienced trauma that has not been adequately treated. Of course, this cannot be an excuse, but still they need to be understood and addressed if we really want to create a change. Violence is an effort to achieve justice or overcome an injustice. Perceiving oneself as a victim does not remove responsibility for the criminal behavior, but we cannot expect a reduction in criminal behavior unless we have set about correcting this sense of victimhood and injustice. So the intention of restorative justice is to shift the focus of student discipline from punishment to reflecting learning. Here you can see a comparison table between criminal justice and restorative justice. For criminal justice, a crime is a violation of the law and the state, or the school, or the institution. For the restorative justice, the crime is harming people and relationships. For criminal justice, violations give rise to guilt, while to restorative justice, violations give rise to obligations. For criminal justice, justice requires the state or the school or the institution to determine the charge and to impose suffering through punishment, while for restorative justice, the justice implies participation, engagement, and taking responsibility. Also, the criminal justice deals only with the offender, while restorative justice includes everyone in the process. Criminal justice focuses on what rule was broken, while restorative justice focuses on understanding how people were affected and what harms occurred. Criminal justice aims to punish the offender, while restorative justice aims to agree on actions to make things right. Criminal justice excludes the offenders through suspension, while restorative justice tries to find what actions can be taken to repair harms and get right with the community. The guiding questions of restorative justice. Ultimately, restorative justice comes down to a set of questions to ask when a situation occurs. These guiding questions are the essence of restorative justice. Who are the victims? What do they need? Who is responsible to deal with this? Who are the stakeholders in the given situation? What are the reasons? What is the right approach to involve stakeholders in efforts to make things right and take action to eliminate the causes that led to the crime? The guiding questions can help us approach problems in a new way, rethink the framework within which the legal system places us, and shift the lenses through which we view violations. The guiding questions also can help us clarify what needs to be done so that we are not blocked and limited by the question, what does the offender deserve? So restorative justice takes a different approach, focusing primarily on needs and associated responsibilities. Here is a comparison between the question that the criminal justice and the restorative justice asks. The criminal justice asks which laws or rules are broken, who are the offenders, and what do they deserve. And the restorative justice asks what is the harm, who was affected, what are his needs, and who is responsible to help. Here is another comparison between traditional justice and restorative justice. Schools and rules are violated according to the traditional justice, and people and relationships are violated according to the restorative justice. The basic restorative process, how and what? The basic restorative process includes face-to-face meetings led by a facilitator, one or as many as needed. The meeting allows victims and offenders to see each other, listen to each other, ask each other direct questions, and negotiate how to fix things. It provides an opportunity for victims to ask questions and tell the offender what the consequences of the crime are. The meetings allow the offender to hear what happened and begin to realize the consequences of what was done, to begin the process of taking responsibility and expressing regret. In summary, efforts to correct what has been done play a central role in restorative justice. These efforts are in two directions. overcoming the harm caused, and overcoming the causes that led to the action. Since restorative justice seeks to make things right, and since they are victims, then restorative justice, of course, must first take care of the victims and their needs. However, restorative justice is also concerned with the recovery and reintegration of the offenders and also for the well-being of the whole community. It seeks to balance care for everyone and promote solutions that focus on accountability, reparation, and healing for all. Restorative practices in schools represent a positive step forward in helping all students from elementary school through middle school and high school, and also all adults, to learn how to navigate conflict resolution, take ownership of their behavior, and practice empathy, perspective taken, and forgiveness. Here are two resources where you can find more about restorative practices, concrete actions, and games. So for violation of the rules, you can use nonviolent communication for finding the why and connection before correction, committee for debating about the rules, and restorative justice and practices. Nonviolent communication and support can be both for the person violating the rules and the people affected by the violation, and can serve for understanding the causes. The Rules Committee can be a group of students and teachers who are talking about the violation in a respectful meeting, discussing possible consequences. Consequences are different than punishment. Consequences are seen more as a feedback from the community to the offender that this is something that is harmful for the others and they don't want to happen anymore. Restorative committees and circles, they need to have a facilitator, a teacher, or best a student, and they can have meetings to talk about the violations, harms, and responsibilities. Every school can adopt and even invent different restorative practices. Any practice can be defined as restorative if it is focusing on the harm, demonstrating equal concern and empathy for both victims and offenders, working for the recovery of victims, supporting also offenders, acknowledging the obligation of the offenders, providing opportunities for direct or indirect dialogue between victims and offenders, finding meaningful approaches to involve the whole community, encouraging cooperation and reintegration, increasing attention to unintended consequences of actions and programs, and respecting the whole group, the victims, the offenders, their family and friends, as well as colleagues in the justice system. If you want to practice, pick one recent conflict or violation of a rule in your school and think through how you could approach it with one of these practices: nonviolent communication, mediation, and restorative practices. And now I leave you with this quote about the human nature. An environment that instills fear eventually forces the child to dull his sensitivity to his own and therefore to any other person's suffering, and accordingly to become indifferent and passive to other people's suffering. Gabor Mate.